Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, When Translated Content Doesn't Quite Land, How to Make AI-Led Translation Work for Retail. I can see people are still coming in, so we'll give another moment or so before we get started properly. But while we wait, please feel free to pop a hello in the chat and let me know where you're joining us from today and what type of retail brand you're working for. It always helps me know who's in the room. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. Right, while we'll see if anyone joins, we'll get started, shall we? So, first things first, I'm James. Unfortunately, our original host, Emma, couldn't join us today due to illness, so I'll be running things in her place. To introduce myself, I'm head of commercial here at Comtec, and I'm a member of our senior leadership team, where I've developed a speciality in marketing localization, covering e-commerce, social media, websites, campaigns, and video. Um, Notably, I've spent years working with high growth retail brands on how language shows up in their customer experience across sectors like fashion, luxury, high street, retail, beauty, food, and lifestyle. Helping retail brands grow internationally is what I'm super passionate about. So it's brilliant to get the chance to speak with so many of you today. To share a bit about Comtec, we've been in localization for a very long time, 45 years to be precise. And over the last few years, we've worked very closely with retailers like Nomad Foods, Aesop, Medicate, Ella's Kitchen, and more, navigating something that's changed hugely, which is how AI fits into their localization setup. And that's really what this session is about. So, in 30 minutes, I want to talk you through a few things. First of all, why localization is a very specific challenge for retailers right now. The difference between translation and localization, so going through these key terms and covering what they actually mean. Why accuracy in translation isn't enough on its own, and where human expertise adds the real value. How to categorize your content to optimize your AI localization setup. A real life example of an optimized localization workflow, looking at how a retailer manages this really effectively. And at the end, I've got a free resource, a localization scorecard to share with you. So I'll talk you through what that means at the end and how you can use it to audit your own localization setup. If you have any questions as we go along as well, please feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. I'll pick them up as we go along, or we can save them for the end. So let's get into it. So let's start with what's actually changed when it comes to AI and translation, because this sets up everything else I'm going to talk about today. A few years ago, if you were a retailer expanding into new markets, the localization conversation was pretty much always about volume. You had thousands of SKUs, you had seasonal campaigns, content refreshing constantly. And the question really was, how do we get enough of this translated fast enough and also at a price that works? That world has since shifted with the rise of AI. Essentially, AI has solved the volume problem. You can now translate huge amounts of content via machines in minutes, in theory. But what we're seeing now, though, with our retail customers is that the challenge has become much more nuanced. And it's really about protecting the brand and the customer's experience while you scale using AI. Um, Honestly, different content types need different types of treatment. Um, and you're trying to balance speed, quality, and consistency all at once, which is harder than it sounds because those three things can actually compete against each other. The takeaway from this slide I've shared on the screen is that, and this is honestly the most important message I'll share with you today, is that a single translation localization method rarely works equally for all your content. If you're using the same translation process for a homepage tagline or a product description, you're either over-investing in one area and under-investing in the other. So it's all about getting strategic. So before we dive in more detail, I want to share a couple of quick definitions because there are two words, translation and localization, that get used interchangeably, but actually they mean different things. Let's start with translation. So translation is about transferring meaning. For example, what does this piece of content say in French or German or Japanese? Translation makes the content understandable and it's focused on linguistic accuracy. And for retail, in a lot of cases, it's obviously necessary, but it's not actually just sufficient, just translating. Localization, however, asks a different question. Localization is about not what it says, but how does this feel? How does it sound? How does it perform? It's about tone of voice, cultural expectations, category specific language your customer expects, how your brand is positioned, and ultimately how the content performs commercially for your brand. In some industries or content types, translation is often enough on its own. For example, a technical manual, accuracy is what is most important there versus style. But in retail, customers are making emotional decisions. They're buying into a brand. They're reading a product description on their phone and deciding whether this feels like a brand they want to invest in, or a product they want to either wear, eat, or purchase for their home. So the gap between translation and localization is where conversion, confidence, and brand consistency all live. So when you hear me talk about localization throughout, rather than translation throughout this session, this is the distinction I'm making. To help bring this to life, I'm going to share 4 words that come up in retail all the time and why being accurate isn't necessarily enough on its own. So there's 4 words on the screen. Let's look at each one by one. Let's start with archive. Literally, this means to store past items. But when a fashion brand says archive, they're signaling something completely different. They're talking about heritage, they're talking about rarity, they're talking about a brand that has depth to it. And if an AI engine translates archive, the word archive literally into another language, you do keep the word, but you may lose the meaning. Maison is another really good example. Maison in French literally means house. But in luxury, it's a sign of status, craft, identity, a brand. Definitely not just a house, but there's a risk, obviously, that might get translated quite literally. Effortless is another really good example. In style, it means aspiration, aspirational brand, an aspirational piece of clothing, and aspirational in terms of how you wear that clothing brand. But if you translate this word literally, it can translate as easy, which is not exactly what you want your brand to be conveying. And finally, the word curated is another really good example. In marketing, this is about taste and judgment. Um, if you had an email saying, check out our grouped picks, which could be a literal translation using AI instead of curated picks, that obviously sounds quite weird in the context. Technically, none of these literal translations are wrong. It has translated the word accurately, but it's lost the context. It's lost the intended meaning. And this is where human expertise earns its keep when you work with AI, preserving intent, tone, and positioning. So the word is doing the job it was actually written to do. So on that note, I want to be really clear about what human expertise means in an AI world, because there's a bit of a myth that human linguists either translate everything or in an AI perspective, they don't do anything. But actually, that's not how it works in real life. Human expertise is still incredibly prevalent, whether you're in any AI workflow. And before we look at different workflows, I want to just really share what human expertise is involved in localization. So it's about professional judgment in 6 very specific areas. Firstly, how the brand should sound. A luxury brand and a value or high street brand speak very differently, even when they're selling similar products. And a linguist helps convey that feeling, not just the words themselves. It's about customer expectations by market. Japanese customers, for example, read product pages very differently to German customers who are perhaps more detail oriented. They also probably read them very differently to Brazilian customers who are more expressive and enjoy more emotive language. The retail copy needs to reflect your audience where they're at. Um, an important one, identifying where content feels translated rather than written for that audience. There's often with AI a subtle flatness or stiltedness that tells your customer they're reading a translation and it's secondhand copy, not an original piece. Cultural and category meaning. So fashion, beauty, homeware, food, these are all specialist words with their own conventions that don't necessarily carry across literally. Style and tone. So some markets want a more direct tone, some like a softer tone of voice, some would like a more formal versus informal tone of voice. And this is the kind of thing you understand and you can only really get right when working with someone in that market, a professional linguist who understands the cultural forces at play. And finally, a really important one when we're talking about the commercials, it's purchase confidence. The language that makes a customer feel confident enough to click buy when they're scrolling on their phone or on their computer. And that's the whole game in retail, getting a customer to purchase your product. So human expertise is about judgment. It's not just checking whether something is right or wrong. What I want to talk you through now is a really useful framework, bearing in mind how humans, professional linguists, hate using the word humans, but professional linguists versus AI add value to the localization process. Um, I'd like you to take this home when we share the slides and have a think about how this can apply to your own content when we're looking at different localization workflows. Um, as you heard mentioned earlier, one process for everything or one size fits all isn't the most efficient localization workflow. And this pyramid here helps you as a retail brand understand where you essentially need to invest best efforts in terms of localization using a mix of different solutions. So let's talk through this pyramid and we'll start at the bottom. We segmented the pyramid into 3 levels. So level 1 is essentially machine translation or AI translation as it's commonly known now. And this is where content that's suited for low risk content or high volume content works really well. Think your product descriptions, FAQ pages, potential user manuals, essentially functional, instructional, repetitive copy where good enough really is good enough. We'll come into these solutions in much more detail in the next few slides, but this is where an AI solution is probably best suited. In the middle, level 2 is what we call hybrid translation. And this is a mix of AI and the professional human touch. An AI would initially create the translations, but a professional linguist polishes the output. Again, we'll look in the next couple of slides at what type of things they will edit for. But this can be useful for social media campaigns, training content, some types of sales and marketing materials, the type of content that needs a double or in some cases a triple check by professional linguists before it goes live. And at the top, we have level 3, which is fully human translation and localization. There's no AI involved in this solution. It's start to finish working with professional linguists. And fully human translation localization is still the best approach for creative content like brand straplines, major campaigns, creative ideation. Essentially, human is best for where the cost of getting it wrong is higher than the cost of doing it properly. And the reason that the pyramid gets narrower as it goes up is actually quite deliberate. High volume, low return content should sit strategically at level 1, a majority of content sitting at level 2, and more strategic, creative, nuanced, tailored copy at the very top using a fully human workflow. And to be honest, the best localization strategies, when I've seen brands really get the most benefits out of this, is when they combine all 3 and work carefully to match each piece of content to what the content is trying to achieve. So on the next few slides, I'd like to look in a bit more depth at each of these levels to explain what they really mean in practice. Let's look at level 1. So here's the thing I want to really get across with AI workflows. AI does not mean human free. And in fact, what most people don't realize about an AI workflow is that the most important work is actually takes place before your content even touches a machine. Now, what I mean by this is that before you send, for example, a product description through an AI engine, there's a lot of setup work to do, and that involves human professional linguists. For example, linguists are needed to build glossaries of approved terminology. This includes your product names, your brand words, your market-specific language. They also work to define the tone of voice that the AI will talk in. So the AI has a clear brief on how your brand should feel. They also work to set up brand language rules, for example, the do's and don'ts for your brand. They help you capture market preferences, the cultural regional expectations, for example, around tone and formality, and they help you nail any category-specific phrasing or language specific to your sector. This all helps make an AI workflow successful. If you skip this step, which a lot of brands do when they first move to AI translation, they're experimenting, you typically get three very predictable problems. Terminology is inconsistent, first of all. The tone is flat and quite bland. And also, you will find from your local market teams, they're actually rewriting a lot of the content, which is exactly what you were trying to avoid. So while AI is a great tool for lots of different types of content, as we mentioned, high volume, low return, repetitive, functional, um, we'd still recommend investing time and budget and getting the setup right in the short term, because that short-term investment really helps AI translation prove dividends in the long term. And that's where the real efficiency comes from. So that's level one. Let's look next at level two. So level two is where hybrid workflows come in. This is AI translation, typically with a human post editor. In some cases, we're often seeing, depending on the content type, you might see two professional linguists involved at the post editing stage. The first linguist focused on accuracy, while the other is focused on style and brand alignment. It's becoming very popular as a replacement for human localization and translation for more and more types of marketing content. In our experience, it's a hugely practical model for a lot of content because it gives you efficiency without giving up the refinement. What the linguist is doing from hybrid workflow when working with AI, it isn't rewriting from scratch. First of all, the linguist is completing all the setup work we discussed in level one to power the AI content and get it to a good enough standard. What they then do is post editing. So working through the content to change AI phrasing that's not contextually correct or it sounds flat. So things like changing the meaning where the AI has gone off piste potentially, restoring tone and readability, checking the content actually lands in market, and making sure brand language is consistent. As mentioned, we're often seeing one, sometimes quite often now, two post editors involved in this process to really craft that content and capture everything you need. And this content can suit product descriptions with a strong brand tone, category instructions for your website, promotional email copy, app and website copy, and customer-facing copy that needs clarity and confidence. The key principle with this is it can be used a lot for a lot of content, but you're not rewriting everything. You're focusing human effort where it creates meaningful improvement. And finally, we have human localization. So this means no AI, as mentioned. Start to finish, professional linguists are involved that know your brand, your category, your target market. In a retail capacity, human localization and translation is really recommended for two key areas. First of all, high brand impact. So think campaign headlines, think hero messaging on your homepage, think brand storytelling, launch campaigns, luxury or premium product positioning. The content that really has to sing and come to life. And these are all places where a slightly flat or slightly off translation can cost you money because it's shaping how customers feel about your brand. So think about investing in human translation for the absolute high impact work and content. And secondly, where there's a high risk, a high commercial risk or high compliance risk, areas that need to be absolutely accurate with no risk are, for example, checkout and payment messaging, because that's where a confused customer might drop out. Legal, policy, and claim sensitive content, because the consequences of getting this wrong are actually regulatory. Things as well like returns and customer service copy, because customer trust can either be broken or built depending on how you handle it. Any content that really inspires trust or drives conversion at the highest level. I also want to be clear that choosing fully human for these areas is not being anti-AI. It's being strategic. It's recognizing that AI, or primarily a hybrid translation approach, can be great for a lot of your content, potentially a large portion. But there's perhaps 20, 30% at the top of that pyramid where investing in human translation will pay back many times over in the financial rewards. So before we look at an example of what could go right for a brand and what a great example looks like. Let's look at what happens when brands don't get the balance quite right, because it can go wrong in two directions. Too much impact, sorry, too much human input, and your costs can rise unnecessarily. For example, turnaround times can slow down, internal teams can struggle to scale because there's bottlenecks in place. You lose a speed advantage because you're putting all the effort where it's not needed necessarily. Um, Too little human impact, however, and your brand voice can start to drift across geographies. Messaging can lose its impact and its energy. Content feels flat, interchangeable, less distinctive. Loads of rewrites happen, and your consistency across markets starts to drop. The goal I mentioned, I'll go back to, is optimizing and investing where it matters and saving where it doesn't. It sounds obvious, but doing this consistently across 100 content types and juggling lots of markets can be really difficult. So what I want to talk you through now is a nice real life example of how a retailer manages localization really effectively. So here's what an optimized workflow actually looks like for a retail brand. In this example, I'm going to use a fashion house, and they have worked through a framework such as the localization pyramid we looked at earlier, and they've categorized their content effectively into three buckets. At level one, we have the AI localization, which they've chosen for material and sizing details, structured product attributes like color, fit, low risk repetitive catalog copy that makes up the bulk of your product listings, and operational internal content like, for example, stock updates or internal comms. So they've decided to use AI for that type of content. At level two, which is the hybrid translation with AI plus the human input, you've got your richer product descriptions where there's still high volume, but the language needs to do a bit more work. You've got things like category instructions on your website, CRM promotional emails, which you need to get out quite often, and also broader areas of your website and app copy. Um, at level three, we've also got the fully human localization, which this client has chosen to use for their campaign lines and the hero messaging. Homepage hero copy to make your website really land. Major promotional campaigns, so your highest value campaigns you're doing throughout the year, and also high impact brand content. Potentially, there's very specific assets where you want these to really, really make a big impact. These are all pieces where the words are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Hopefully, this gives you an idea of what a well-structured localization approach can look like for a retailer. As mentioned, the value comes from matching the translation approach to the job. So every piece of content is doing what it's trying to do and not treating everything in the same manner. Where this gets difficult in practice, though, is actually implementing it. So most teams I talk through the framework with say it makes sense. The hard part is understanding the principles. It's actually about applying it consistently when you have so much fast-moving copy, different teams, different markets. So what I want you to do is share with you 6 key factors that are worth thinking about when you're taking that content categorization pyramid and deciding which content fits where. So first of all, the content type. What job is this piece of content doing? Is it informing, persuading, selling, or reassuring, for example? Next, visibility. So how prominent is this copy? Is it a homepage banner or homepage in general seen by everyone? Or is it a product page or a blog hidden within the website that might only be viewed by a handful of people? Next, market priority. So how strategically important is each market to your business? A tier one market might need level three, i.e. human localization treatment for everything, where a newer market you're trying to enter and test might not need the full level three approach. It might need a mix of levels one and two. Next, language suitability, which is really, really important when it comes to AI. So understanding, does AI handle this language pair? Some languages are served okay by AI. French, German, for example, are handled better than Thai or Arabic, let's say. So that's really, really important to understand when you're considering using AI. Next, commercial risk. What is the cost if this content underperforms? Is it lost conversion, lost opportunity? Is there a compliance issue? Or is there a customer complaint potentially if it's not quite right? And finally, brand sensitivity. How much is this piece of content shaping how you want customers to feel about your brand? If you're trying to decide essentially what particular piece of content is which approach, whether it's AI, customized by humans, of course, um, AI with human post editing on top, potentially several rounds, or your fully dedicated human translation localization by professional linguists, these questions, thinking about each of these six things, really help you get to that answer super quickly. And in all questions, our free resource I mentioned walks you through, which I'm going to give you a peek of now. So, as mentioned, we've developed a free tool called our localization scorecard. It's designed to help our clients categorize their content based on the characteristics we've just talked about. It then gives all the users a report which outlines content by content piece, which solution we recommend based on the input you've shared to the scorecard and why. For example, it will categorize your content as you see on the previous slide into buckets, for example, of AI translation, hybrid translation, or fully human translation and localization. Now, you can use this scorecard in two ways. Option one, you can do it yourself. So everyone attending this or who's signed up for this webinar today, in case you're watching it back later, will receive a link to this after the session. So please feel free to fill this in and you get your report. Option two, however, is what we would most recommend because the localization scorecard, it's a scorecard that is always nuance and more decision making in these kind of localization strategic decisions. So what we'd recommend is if you're really actively thinking about your localization setup and you'd like to explore different solutions for different types of content, feel free to book in a free 30 to 45-minute session with us, and one of our team will walk you through this on your actual content. You'll come out with a more personalized report and a set of recommendations specific to your brand, working with us directly. Either way, we'll get in touch with the link after the session. So please feel free to experiment yourself or get in touch with us if you'd like any support from us. So that is everything from me. Thank you so much for your time today. And if anything we've discussed has sparked something, whether it's a specific challenge you're wrestling with, a language pair you're having trouble with, or you just like to look at your localization setup, please do get in touch. My email's on the slide, and I'm always happy to chat. So please drop me a message if you're interested. You'll also see from our logos at the bottom, we are ISO certified and we are B Corp certified. The reason I mention these things is because there's a lot of noise around AI right now, and we'd always recommend working with a dedicated partner, a trusted partner like us, who takes the quality and ethical usage side of AI super seriously to make sure you get the best results without the risk. So that is everything from me in terms of our presentation. Before we finish, do we have any questions at all? It looks like we're all okay. Thank you very much for the feedback in the comments as well. I really appreciate the kind feedback. Well, it sounds like my presentation was comprehensive. So please look out in your inbox very soon a link, an email from me, which will contain the link, a recording of this session, a link to the slides as well, and most importantly, a link to the scorecard so you can test it out yourself. And if you have any queries at all, please don't hesitate to get in touch and I'd be delighted to support you. So have a fantastic day, everyone, and I will speak to you soon. Take care. Goodbye.